What if I told you, scientifically, you have a 30% advantage in first-person shooters when peeking around the corner? Let's imagine you're playing an FPS. You come around the corner, see an enemy, and instantly headshot them before they could even react. If you could see both screens at once, there's a real chance that the enemy player never even had the chance to see you fully. That gap has a name: Peeker's Advantage. This video is part 3 of my netcode series, where I break down the strategies and concepts that make online multiplayer work. In this part, I'm gonna explain why Peeker's Advantage happens. We will look at a scientific paper that explains how big it really is, and then we're gonna take a look at how big studios try to reduce it. As always, you can find links to all my sources in the description, and if I got anything wrong, feel free to correct me in the comment section. To visualize different netcode concepts, I created this Latency Simulator. The Latency Simulator allows us to see multiple perspectives at the same time. The solid colored character is what you see, and the transparent ghost is the enemy's perspective. If you remember my last video, it was still in 2D, and now I transformed it into 3D and added some additional features. First, we need to understand how do online multiplayer games work on a top level, and I'm gonna keep it really short since I have explained this in my other videos in length. Okay, we have the clients and the server. The clients are the players and the server holds the authoritative game state. Now, when a client shoots, it sends a command to the server. The server evaluates this command and decides what happens. Does the shot count or not? And now, you have different strategies on how you can evaluate the validity of the shot. Now, before I go into the explanation, I want to mention that in shooter games you have two types of weapons: projectile weapons like rockets and hit scan weapons like guns. In this example, we will focus on hit scan weapons. So we have the peeker or the attacker, we have the server, and we have the defender. Now, we want to take a look at the scenario where the peeker moves in and shoots at the defender. So the peeker moves into view. This command is sent to the server, which takes a specific amount of time, T. The server notifies in the next game state update the defender about the new position of the peeker. This also takes some time to arrive on the defender's side. Now, depending on the peeker's reaction time, at some point, he fires from his point of view a lethal strike at the defender. The fire command is sent to the server evaluates this and sends an update to the defender. But in the meantime, the defender has also fired a lethal shot from his point of view. You see the paradox now. We have different ways how we can evaluate this situation. First, we can honor the server game state and say, as the commands arrive, everything is evaluated at the server side. This would mean you would have to think about how will my shot translate on the server game state. How high is my latency? Where will the enemy be? How do I need to shoot in order to hit someone on the server game state? The second scenario is we honor the shooter's point of view. So with the shot, we send a timestamp, and the server then evaluates the shot from the shooter's perspective in that moment of time. This leads to other types of problems, like what if the shot was lethal, we honor the shot, but in the meantime the defender also fired a lethal shot. As you can see, it's a very tricky situation. Now let's talk about how games handle this problem. In early shooters like Quake, the shot was evaluated based upon the server game state. To simulate that in the Latency Simulator, I have to turn off the server-side lag compensation. Now, in low latency games like local game sessions, this wasn't a problem since the latency was almost non-existent. But when latency is high, the world the shooter sees might already be 200 milliseconds old. Now, if I increase my latency to extreme levels, you will see how the enemy ghost, which represents his point of view, moves far ahead from my perspective, which is the solid red character. If I shoot at the solid one, nothing will happen, since by the time my command arrives at the server state, it will be too late, so the shot doesn't count. That means you always had to have a sixth sense for your latency and then approximately aim where the enemy should be. You had to lead your shots. If I shoot now at the ghost, which in normal gameplay you don't see, I will eliminate the enemy. So in this scenario, low latency players had a big advantage over high latency players. This was frustrating. You could not just aim at what you see and shoot, you had to predict your enemy's trajectory. But then in 2001, Counter-Strike came with a new approach. It was a paradigm shift. They introduced server-side lag compensation. So I'm gonna turn it on in the latency sim. Now, the shot is evaluated on what the shooter saw at the moment of fire. The server keeps a short history of snapshots. It rewinds the world to the shooter's timestamp. And then it checks if the crosshair was on a target from that point of view. If yes, the shot counts. This became the dominant approach in online games. It favors the shooter and feels more fair. I mean, you aim at what you see, no more shot leading. And generally speaking, players liked it more than the old Quake style. But there was a cost. Sometimes the defender dies as they reach the cover in their game. Because the enemy's game was lagging maybe 100 milliseconds behind, they could still see them and shoot them. And since the server favors the shooter's viewpoint, it counts the shot as valid. You can imagine if you don't limit this time frame, it can get really absurd. Modern shooters are still trying to balance this trade-off. Protect clean hits from the attacker or protect the defender last moment escape. Now we can put one and one together and understand why server-side lag compensation creates artifacts like Peeker's advantage. But let's go back to the example from the intro. So imagine, or you don't need to imagine, you can just look at my example. We have an attacker coming towards a corner. A defender is waiting behind it. And we can assume that both have some latency. Now, because of client-side prediction, the attacker feels instant movement. And when he clears the corner, he sees the defender first. He shoots, and with server-side lag compensation, the headshot lands. From his point of view, of course. The defender's shots that happen after that moment do not count. Here is how the server handles a shot. It gets a packet from the client that says at time t I fired from position A. It opens its history, it rewinds the defender to time t, it checks the line of the shot in that rewound state. If the hit would kill, the defender dies at that moment on the server. Then the server jumps back to now and just keeps running. If the defender's shot arrives after that, the server ignores it. On the defender's screen, they were still moving. But on the server side, the decision was already made. He's cooked. You have to understand that no two players see the same moment in time. Now, of course, netcode developers are trying to limit this. They kept the max rewind window so very late packets do not register. But all these rules do not remove latency. They just decide where you feel it and how large the side effects are. And now you're probably wondering, or maybe not, but Tariq, I really like your videos and your haircut, but how do I start coding? I mean, you can be a Neanderthal about it like me in 2004 by writing code on paper, but imagine you could follow a tutorial where you are coding in a browser without installing anything. Well, welcome to the future. This leads us to today's sponsor, Scrimba. The guys at Scrimba did exactly that. They looked at coding tutorials and thought, how about we do this but better? Everything is integrated in the browser, your IDE and the tutorial. And it's all synchronized in one window so you don't have to move your eyes around like a chameleon. For example, you can just edit the code directly in the window. Instead of let's make a cake, you can write I wanna eat all the cake. Every time you make a change, Scrimba creates this kind of branch which is saved automatically and you can go back to it later on. Scrimba's got a huge library of topics and courses, and they just launched a full stack developer path. This is not a watch 1 hour and get hired BS. This is a massive course teaching you the entire stack from backend to frontend, focused on core skills from the JavaScript ecosystem, like React, Node, Next, and even teaching you how to integrate AI stuff. On top of the lessons, you get project-based learning and an actually helpful Discord community. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. And now, before anyone starts foaming, listen, around 80% of the content is free, okay? So this time, brother, you have no excuse. I'm sorry. And on top of that, Uncle Tariq's link gives you 20% off the Scrimba Pro plans. How about that? So hit the link, learn something, get a job, and make mama proud. Now back to the video. To understand the real impact of peaker's advantage, we're gonna take a look at a scientific study that investigated exactly that. The data showed that the advantage is not a small amount. It's about 30% in a scenario where the latency favors the peaker. If you want to read the whole paper, a link is in the description. I'm just gonna briefly explain the methods and take a look at the results. Okay. So for the research, they have built this demo FPS game. One player is always the defender, defending the corner. He can aim and shoot, but he cannot move. The other player is always the peaker. He has to move in and try to take the corner. The weapon for both players is designed so a single shot always kills, and reload time is half a second, so you can't just run in and spam. Okay, they tested this game with real players with different latencies and different distances between the peaker and the defender. Then they logged the wins, hits, and time to damage. Now if you scroll down and take a look at table 2, we can see the win percentage difference. Negative numbers mean the peaker loses more, and positive numbers mean the peaker wins more. Now with the defender at 0 milliseconds latency and the peaker also at 0 milliseconds latency, the peaker sits around minus 5.4%. When they added 30 milliseconds to the defender latency, the win advantage went to 3 to 4% in the favor of the peaker. And when they added to the defender 60 milliseconds latency, the peaker jumps to around plus 28 to 31% across the rows. And this is the big pattern. Moving delay onto the peaker hurts less. For example, peaker 60 milliseconds with defender 0 milliseconds is about minus 13%. But once the defender has 30 milliseconds, the peaker is already back to plus 16.5%. So the defender latency drives the advantage hard. Okay, now let's take a look at the distance results. So they tested 7 meters, 19 meters, and 27 meters. The advantage grows as the peaker stands farther from the corner. It's small at 7 meters, bigger at 19, and high at 27. And these stats confirm a strong distance effect, and the reason makes sense. I mean, farther back gives the peaker earlier vision and exposes less of their model while taking the corner. So the quick read is this. If we put latency on the defender, the peaker's advantage becomes more obvious. It becomes very significant. And if we move the peaker farther from the corner, the win rate increases again. And that is the core of the results. Which means in a FPS game, to max out the peaker's advantage, you have to hope for a high latency on your enemies, and it's best if you take the corner from a far distance. Now let's take a quick look on the time to damage. The peaker lands the first hit a little sooner on average, around 290.5 milliseconds for the peaker and about 300 for the defender. I mean, the gap is small, but it's still real. At 19 meters, it becomes more obvious. We have 250 for the peaker and 270 for the defender, so 20 milliseconds. So at 7 and 27 meters, the difference is not too strong. Now, what they also did is they reran the same tests as a small tournament where the winner won a graphics card. They wanted to spark the competitiveness of the players. And what changed was the rhythm of the game. So players took more fights each round. Time to damage dropped by about 40 milliseconds on average, accuracy gaps tightened, and scores got closer. What did not change is the pattern. So adding latency to the defender still shifts wins to the peaker. And standing farther from the corner still helps the peaker. So yeah, some people actually do have fun at work, organizing FPS tournaments and giving away graphic cards. I mean, I'm not jealous, but we could also organize something like this at work, so I could finally smoke some people that I like very much. Anyways, we have now understood the problem, or at least I hope we did. Let's now take a look what did a big game development studio like Riot Games did to solve this issue in Valorant. They have written a really good article on the peaker's advantage, explaining the problem but also stating what they did to minimize this issue in terms of servers and also game design, which I found very interesting. So let's take a look at the article. Okay, the link is in the description in case someone has no hobbies and wants to read this. They basically explain the mechanics why this peaker's advantage happens, but we are interested in the countermeasures they defined. Okay, so let's scroll. Here you go. So first, they tried to minimize the network latency by putting servers all over the world. That means you normally connect to a nearby region. I mean, European players do not get thrown onto US servers in a normal game. Shorter distance means lower ping, and their target is about 35 milliseconds for most players. And they also run their own network called Riot Direct to keep this route short. Okay, next they raised the server tick rate to 128. That means the server checks or updates the game state 128 times each second. More updates means your movement and your shots get processed sooner, and that lowers the time the defender waits to see you peek. Then they also push the client frame rate. The game is tuned to hit 60 frames per second on most machines and much higher on fast machines. And more frames means you see updates sooner on your screen. That means at higher FPS, the peaker's advantage drops. Then they keep the buffering tight. On the client, they try to buffer about 1 frame. On the server, they target about half a frame on average. Smaller buffers add less delay, so what you see is fresher, so to speak. In the example they provided, this trims roughly 40 milliseconds of peaker's advantage. That's about a 28% cut. They also give you a setting for client network buffering. You can pick smoother motion or lower latency based on your connection. It is a trade-off you can control. So Riot is very clear that you can't reach zero peaker's advantage. But now from the game design side, they try to figure out which factors can we adjust to balance the game out, things that are not related to the network. They designed the game so the defender gets a small built-in advantage over the peaker. For example, when you walk, your aim is less accurate. A still player aims better. That gives the defender a small advantage. Also, if you get hit, you slow down for a moment. A peaker who gets clipped is easier to finish. Then when someone peeks, the shoulder and the gun show before the head, so the defender sees at least something first and can get prepared to start the encounter. And also, maps can include spots where you can hold and still watch the approach. You show less of your body and still get the vision. Now, all of this does not remove the latency, that's also not the point, but it shifts a little power back to the defender. And the goal is to make the game feel more fair. Conclusion. Online play will always be slightly out of sync. Your PC shows your perspective immediately and other players from a short time in the past. The server sits in the middle and decides what actually happened. And that creates some type of a chicken and egg problem where you can't fully resolve, do you protect what the defender saw or what the attacker saw? And you can't make both perfect at the same time. If you don't rewind, you protect the defender and force the attacker to lead his shots. That reduces late death moments but creates a lot of "my shot didn't count" frustration, especially for high latency attackers. If you do rewind, you protect the attacker's perspective and accept that defenders will sometimes die as they reach cover. Now, everything else is the art of limiting the cost. Reduce round trip time, cap the rewind window, and optimize the client so frame pacing and input latency are stable. Now, the general advice is very simple. Low ping and high FPS helps. Specifically now for the defender, standing a step back from the corner or using a slightly different angle can buy you reaction time. And specifically for the attacker, you have to recognize that you control the timing. That is the built-in advantage and it's measurable. The study showed us that the peeker's advantage is significant. And remember, good netcode doesn't pretend there is no latency. It picks out the best fitting trade-offs that make the game more playable. Now I want to take the moment and say a big thank you to my Patreons and YouTube members. If you want to support the channel, there's a Patreon link in the description. I post there book and movie recommendations, some kind of life updates, or answer your career related questions. You can also just leave me a comment. Comments really seem to help the algorithm pick up my videos. And yeah, so that's it for today. If you like the content, hit like and subscribe, and see you in the next one. Tariq 10x.